Hi, welcome back. I'm going to do a quick video on one of the silliest arguments on the pro-abortion side of the aisle. And the reason why I think it's so silly is because it only takes just a little bit of thought to realize what you're missing in this argument. So the claim on the pro-abortion side is that men shouldn't be regulating women's bodies, or sometimes it's phrased different. Men shouldn't be legislating about women's bodies. No uterus, no opinion. Whatever it is, it all basically means the same thing. That men shouldn't be having a say, shouldn't have an opinion. Of course, unless the man agrees with you on abortion, then they can voice their opinion and have a say in the legislative process about women's bodies. For example, if we look at the Supreme Court that decided Roe v. Wade, well, it was all men. And none of the people who were saying no uterus, no opinion seemed to think that that was a problem, right? And it's obvious because they voted the way that they wanted them to. So you're allowed to have an opinion as long as you agree with us. So one, that's just silly in and of itself. But to get into why I think it's silly, when you think about the type of government that we have, it's all based on representation. Okay, everything, from local government to state government, federal government, it's all based on representation. You're voting for someone that you want to represent you in that government arena. Local, state, federal, doesn't matter. Now, it doesn't matter who is representing you, what characteristics they have, right? I could, in theory, I could vote for a woman to represent me in the Senate, in the House. I could vote for a woman as president, or in local government, in the city council. I could vote for anyone. They don't have to look like me. We don't have to be the same gender. We don't have to be the same race. None of that matters. Because what they're representing is not what I look like in the mirror. They're representing the ideals that I like in government. They represent what I think government should do or should not do. So when you have this bogus claim about men regulating women's bodies, I don't even know what that means. Name the man or the men who are just this cabal of men who are conspiring together to regulate women's bodies that haven't been put in place by a democratic process, right? It doesn't exist. See, what most people don't realize is that a politician's main priority, it's not passing legislation, it's not, voting in elections or in legislative processes. It's none of that. Their main priority is to get reelected. Right? Any public office has that, well, any elected public office, I should say, has that, every 2-4 years, whatever the cycle is, they have that edge, that limit to their term that they need to be considering. Right? Imagine showing up to work and knowing that you only have, 2 years left at your job. And you have an ability to extend that, right? You can do things on your end to extend that or renew it or whatever it is. Aren't you going to be focused on doing whatever it is that you need to do to get reelected, to extend your job contract? I mean, it's just basic incentives. So when you have this claim that men are regulating women's bodies, the first thing you need to understand is that any man who is holding public office that was put there through an election, through a popular vote, or an electoral vote, whatever, they are there because a majority of people voted them in office. Right? It's been decades now since women have obtained the vote, and what you need to realize is that women outvote men, right? I just did a quick search and I found this is a little old, it's from 2014, but women outvote men. Who's more likely to vote, men or women? And you can find all the statistics in here. I'll link these websites down below. But time and time again, women outvote men. Just in local elections, state elections, federal elections, it doesn't matter. Women outvote men. All over the place, all over the country. And then, on top of that, most people don't realize, I think whenever I've met a pro-abortion woman, I don't think that they realize how many women are actually pro-life. Because people tend to congregate and associate with people who are similar to them and have similar views. And what amazes me is that when you try to tell a pro-abortion woman that, in fact, most women are pro-life, right? She's not actually fighting against men. She's fighting against the majority of women and most likely a minority of men when it comes to abortion, whether it should be legal or illegal or restricted or whatever. And what seems so insidious to me is that the people at the top of the movement for pro-abortion, the politicians who are pushing it, Planned Parenthood, the companies who are profiting off of abortion, it seems extremely disingenuous to try to push this narrative that that abortion is somehow a men versus women issue, when it's not, and it's so easy to see. So when you look at how a representative government works, it doesn't matter if a man is holding office. If he's there, it's because the majority of people, men and women, and a majority of women, because women outvote men, voted him in office. Now, when you vote someone into office, it's because they are, claiming or promising to do what you want them to do in government. With situations like abortion, it's pretty easy to know what someone's position is on abortion before you elect them. Right? So most of these people who are pro-life that are in government, like in Georgia or wherever else that they're trying to pass these heartbeat bills, their opinions and stances and positions on abortion were well known before they got elected. And what they're doing is abiding by the will of their constituents. And the reason they're doing that is so that they can get reelected. Right? So if you take this argument seriously and you consider that somehow it's just men trying to regulate women's bodies, you're completely missing the point that if that were true, and let's say in Georgia, for example, that even though that's a terrible case because it was a woman who proposed the law and a woman governor who signed it into state law. But either way, they're still trying to claim that somehow it's men regulating women's bodies. When you consider that in the entirety of what's happening within this government process, those people, those men, supposedly those men, wouldn't get reelected, whenever their term is up in the next 2 to 4 years or whatever. And then presumably the people who, women, I guess apparently because only men are pro-life and somehow only women are pro-choice or whatever, they'll lose their job, they won't get reelected, the men won't, and then a woman or a man who's pro-abortion will get elected and then just reverse the law and make abortion legal again. Right? And who knows, maybe in this case that will happen. And that's how democracy works. It's a revolving door, so to speak. But it's not this weird thing where men are controlling women's bodies. Men who are holding public office are only doing what their constituents want them to do. And if they don't do that, then they don't get reelected. And as I said, the politician's main job is to get reelected. So it doesn't make any sense to say that that men are regulating women's bodies. It's really not a men versus women issue. It's just about people who think that life is sacred and that life starts at conception and is worthy of being protected. And there's the people who think that either it's not a life until it's born or shortly after birth, or that there's a few insidious people out there that are willing to admit that it is a life, but they just don't care because it's inconvenient. or worse, they think it's better to kill the child than let it be born into troubling circumstances or hardship or whatever. But it's not men versus women, and the easiest way to tell is that, one, women outvote men, and when you look at the polling data, women are more pro-life than men, which means that when you really look at the numbers, women are outvoting men and they're more pro-life than men. So in all of these instances where there's pro-life legislation happening or heartbeat bills, it is almost primarily due to women in the pro-life movement. There's in almost zero circumstances is it a man regulating a woman's body. And again, just because the man happens to be the one holding public office at the time and is the one that pushes the legislation through or signs it into law, that doesn't mean that it is him, that man, that's doing it. He is acting on behalf of his constituents, which voted him into office. But it's not the man that's doing it. In most cases, legislators are not the ones who are writing their own bills that they sponsor. It's, think tanks or whatever else. They're submitting bills and they're getting sponsored by these legislators. So it's not men who are regulating women's bodies, it's voters who are regulating women's bodies or attempting to regulate women's bodies. And these are just a few websites I clicked on, and they all say the same thing. They find the same thing. Women are more pro-life than men consistently. And this is one website, so Gallup, which is usually pretty respected as far as a polling company goes. But they found that men and women generally hold similar abortion attitudes. I'll link this website down in the description as well. You can read through it. It seems fairly accurate. It doesn't necessarily overturn the very prevalent reality that women are majority pro-life and men, on the other hand, are majority pro-choice. But it is, based on the questions that they're asking, it does appear that in a lot of ways the public opinion is shifting, and there are incrementally more women who are taking the pro-choice side. And I think that in part is due to the propaganda behind the narrative of men versus women. Right? It's very easy to get tribalistic when you can very clearly delineate two sides saying, oh, it's men versus women, and men are attacking women, or men are taking away their freedoms, and they're regulating their bodies. But in reality, that's just not true. It's not true at all. Right? So whenever I see or hear, or I see a post on Facebook or Twitter about how men are regulating women's bodies, it just drives me crazy, because it shows a complete lack of understanding of how our government works. And so hopefully this video has given you a little bit of information in this regard if you are to encounter a woman who's using this argument to support her stance. Like I said, I think there's reasonable-ish arguments for being pro-abortion. Not that I agree with any of them. It's just that there's much more logically sound ways to advocate for abortion, and suggesting that it's men regulating women's bodies and therefore it's bad is not a good argument, because it doesn't hold up to any of the data that we have about how people vote and how a representative democracy works. So hopefully this gives you some good information. This has obviously been spoken about a lot by other people who have pro-life views, but I think the more people who give these explanations in their own way, it can help resonate with different people. And so I'd like to just suggest, if you have, I guess, maybe questions, or you think that maybe I'm completely wrong about this and you are under the impression that there's just some cabal of men out there who are regulating women's bodies or something, go ahead and post that in the comments if you have, some kind of source or link that you want to put down there, and correct me where I'm wrong about this. But it seems pretty straightforward to me that there's no such thing as men or women who are regulating each other's bodies or doing any of that. It's just voters. Voters are the ones who are putting these politicians in place that are passing the legislation that they want done. But yeah, hopefully that made sense, and you can use this to hopefully explain clearly enough to those who hold this view to get them to at least see the disingenuous nature behind the statement of men are regulating women's bodies. But that should be it for now. I think between this and the other video I did, I've pretty much covered all of my thoughts on abortion, and so I'll leave you with that.